Just a quick disclosure. Good afternoon. I'm Community Development Committee Chair Robert Lilligren for it's Monday, April 5th. Before I call the regular meeting to order, just a few things about how we conduct this meeting. Acknowledging that COVID-19 is still causing us to alter our usual procedures, and Governor Walz has declared a peacetime emergency in response to COVID-19. At the Metropolitan Council, we've determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct in-person committee meetings. So we will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and the Community Development Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. We're conducting this meeting by WebEx. It's being recorded. Members of the public can monitor this meeting by going to the agenda online to view the live stream of the meeting. The video is embedded in the website. So as I call this to order, I will ask Michelle to take roll call to ensure we have a quorum. Michelle, please.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Musse. Bento.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. We do have a quorum. Oh, I'll note that Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen texted me, and she'll be in here at 4:30. She'll be joining us. The first item on our agenda is approval of our agenda, and members can see the agenda posted online. If there are no objections or changes, then we can move on to business. Any objections or changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the next item is approval of the minutes from the March 1st meeting. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Vento moves approval.
Thanks, council members. We have a motion. Thank you. And a second. Any discussion on the minutes, approvals, amendments, any discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the minutes.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Musse. Bento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle, and the minutes are adopted. We'll move on to our business items. The first is item 2021-57. It's a joint committee's item. It's the budget amendment for the first quarter, and Heather Augustin-Hubner will present. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you, Chair, Council members. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, I am jealous of the outdoor seating option. Mine's a little too windy for that right now. So again, my name is Heather Augustin-Hubner. I'm the Finance Director for Community Development, and I'm before you today for the first quarter budget amendment. What you are acting on is attachment 1, and that contains program level information. I'm also going to highlight some items from attachment 3, which is included for transparency and information, but you're not acting on attachment 3. I think you've all been here for a handful of cycles, so that this is just typically how we do these. So I want to highlight a few items from attachment 1. First, we are always in a process of reviewing projects and closing projects. So in this amendment, we're going to be closing just over 55 projects and removing about $39 million from our capital program. These projects have been complete and fully expended the funds. So we're not turning anything back. We're not losing any money. It's just very routine closing of completed projects. Second, we are requesting to program just over 41,000 of legacy reserves to Anoka County. Now, we typically do not have legacy reserves to program. The only reason they're available now is because there was a payback from Anoka County. They accidentally drew the same expenses on 2 different grants. one with us, one with a different agency. The issue was addressed, they paid that back, and it was part of their formula allocation. So now we're allocating that back to Anoka County, but we do have all of the administrative processes correct behind it. Third, we're reopening project 1029 to do a funding swap. And that specific project is, excuse me, it's a project for Carver County. And what the amendment is going to do, it's going to authorize a one-to-one funding swap. So the amendment will authorize just over $470,000 from our closed debt fund interest earnings into the project, and a $470,000 transfer of regional bonds away from that project into reserve. So we're just taking, those of you that sit on transportation committee, we do this fairly often in the transportation division. So we're taking $1 over here, $1 over here, and we're just pushing them into different accounts. It does not have any impact on the project or the capital program broadly. Details for the administrative adjustment can be found in attachment 3. And again, this represents projects where the funding has already been approved in the ACP through a previous amendment, and it's being programmed to specific projects. So you're going to see a lot of them in this amendment. So all of the projects have been reviewed for conformity with the Regional Parks Policy Plan, and they're an approved Parks and Trails Master Plan. The projects have been reviewed by Metropolitan Parks and Open Space, or MPOSC. There are also a handful of acquisition projects in this section. They have been approved by you in separate business items. So really what you're seeing here is a series of places where the council has authorized the money, and it's formula money or for specific projects, like the acquisition projects. We cannot award an acquisition project unless there's funds in the authorized capital program. So it's kind of sequential. You authorize the funds, then you authorize the project, and this is us programming those dollars to that specific project in reaction to the policy action that you have taken. So that's a lot of what you see here. In this budget amendment, the Thrive outcome of stewardship is supported through responsible planning and management of resources for the Community Development Division capital program. And with this, that ends my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions on that report? Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a technical question with the one-to-one funding swap that, if I heard it right, the debt earned interest is going into reserve. How often is that happening? And are we able to fund our reserves to come up with what we're taking out of reserves that way? How does it help?
Heather.
Sure, Chair, Council Member. I'm sorry, my phone is let me just turn this ringer off. Excuse me. Let me try and answer this way, and if it doesn't answer your question, I'll take a second stab at it. So interest earnings are acquired on a rolling basis, right? So the council has money in our accounts. It's just like your checking accounts are going to, or your savings accounts, or your interest, or your investments are going to earn interest. So we do have some interest in some council accounts, and before we do anything with those, we bring those decisions to you as a council to authorize our use of them. So they are considered one-time funding. These interest earnings are coming from the council bond program. So we're essentially putting the money was earned through the council bond program, and we're just kind of doing a dollar for dollar regional bond back into the reserves account and the interest earnings out of the account. So at the end of the day, the reserve account is going to have the same dollar amount, and the authorized capital program is going to have the same dollar amount. It's just a different color of money. Did that answer your question?
It certainly did. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions on that report? Further questions? If not, Heather has proposed an action that the Metropolitan Council authorize the 2021 Unified Budget Amendment as indicated and in accordance with the tables attached to the report. Is there a motion, please?
Johnson moves.
Thank you, Councilmember. A second?
Second by Chambliss.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted. And we'll move on to our second business item, which is 2021-67, also a joint committees item. It's the 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan for the City of Savage. And Raya Smalley is here to present. Welcome, Ms. Smalley.
Hi, thank you, Chair Lilligrand, and hello, everyone. I'm Raya Smiley. I'm Sector Representative for District 4, Carver County, and most of Scott County in the Local Planning Assistance Group in CD. Before I start, I would like to let the committee know that Brian Tucker, the City of Savage's planning manager, is also in the audience today. And I do want to extend my thanks to Brian for working very diligently with us in bringing this plan to completion. So before you today is the review of the City of Savage's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this map, which is also figure 1 of the staff report, shows the location of regional system components within the City of Savage. There are 3 interceptors, a lift station, 2 highways and county roads, RBTNs, and there's a park reserve as well as a search corridor and 2 additional recreational open space areas. Next slide, please. Thank you. This map shows the figure 2 of the staff report. It identifies the city as a suburban community designation consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. As you can see in the map, Savage is located in the northeast corner of Scott County, and it is surrounded by the communities of Bloomington, Burnsville, Credit River, well, City of Credit River actually at this point, Prior Lake, Shakopee, and Eden Prairie. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is table 1 of the staff report that shows between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 7,700 people, representing 2,700 households, and there will be an increase of 1,300 jobs in the city in the same time frame. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is table 2 from the staff report, and it shows the planned residential density in the city. The overall density for guided residential land uses is expected to be between 6.6 and 11.5 units per acre. Suburban communities under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and growth at an overall average minimum density of 5 units per acre, and the City of Savage's plan is consistent with that land use policy. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is figure 3 of the staff report, which is the city's existing land use map. The existing land uses are predominantly residential, and most of the commercial and industrial areas are near and adjacent to main transportation corridors. There is approximately 23% of the city that is park and open space. The city also has a functioning port on the Minnesota River that is served by barge companies on the northeastern part of the city that agribusiness, food handling, and processing facilities rely on this. So there's quite a bit of industrial land in that area as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is figure 4 of the staff report, which is the future land use map. The majority of the city's growth is accommodated through redevelopment, infill, and reuse of land. There's over 40% residential land that is planned by 2040. and most of it is planned for higher density. The future land uses also include additional capacity and for mixed use. And the plan also identifies a couple of special area plans that address very distinctive visions and goals. Two of them, one of them is Hamilton District and Savage Fen Wetland Complex that are shown on this map as overlay districts. So they're kind of in the north and northeast part of the city. Next slide, please. So the proposed findings is that the plan conforms to metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So this plan is also scheduled to be on the Environment Committee's agenda on April 13th, and then it will be on the Metropolitan Council's agenda on April 28th. Again, I want to remind the committee that Brian Tucker, the City of Savage's planning manager, is in the audience. And next slide. Thank you. So the proposed action before you today is to authorize the City of Savage to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and advise the city to, when available, provide to the council the dates that each of the watersheds approved the local water management plan and the date the city adopted the final local water management plan. Council staff also requests that the city provide the council with a copy of the final adopted local water management plan that will be included in the final plan document that the city adopts, and implement the advisory comments in the review record for transportation, land use, and water supply. And next slide, please. Well, with that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, thanks, Mrs. Smiley, for your work on this and for the presentation. Thanks, Mr. Tucker, for being here and for your partnership as well. Any questions on that report? Questions? And hearing none, Mrs. Smiley has recommended two actions: that we authorize the City of Savage to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, and then some advisements to the city regarding their local water management plan and the comments from the review record for transportation, land use, and water supply. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Wolf moves approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That item is adopted, and we'll move on to our third business item for today. It's 2021-82. It's a project change for Stonehouse Square contamination cleanup grant, and Joshua Wadrick is with us to present. Welcome, Mr. Wadrick.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair and committee members. I am Josiah Wadrick, and I work with the CDMTS Finance and Admin Group. And I'm the principal project administrator, and I work primarily with the LCA grants and have for many years. And what I do is I kind of handle the grants administration after it's been awarded. And I'm presenting two project changes to you, both for the city of Minneapolis for grants that were awarded, contamination cleanup grants that were awarded. But before I get into the project changes, I also want to say that Amy Geisler is a representative for Minneapolis, and she is also on the call and then can help field any questions that you might have. Go on to the next slide, please. So the first project change is for Stonehouse Square. Well, first some background on our amendment process. All the livable communities grants are competitive grant awards. And because of that, we require grantees to notify us if there's been any changes to the project from what it was initially scored in the application. And the reason why we do that is we don't want to get into a situation where we score a grant and it funds, or it scores really high and we fund it, and then it might be, the project might be reduced or changed later, and maybe another grant would have received funding instead. So as part of our monitoring process, we just keep up with the projects. And if we are notified of any changes, what we do is we review it for any significant changes in that grant program. And for TBRA, what we mostly pay attention to is reductions in the affordable housing units, or reduction in the net tax capacity increase, or reductions in the jobs that we expect from the project. And if there is significant changes, then we bring it to you for further approval. Next slide, please. Just a brief overview of this grant. It was given in the fall of 2019, and it is for completing an abatement plan and for soil remediation. The project itself is for the renovation and preservation of 71 affordable housing units. So this project was a naturally occurring affordable project. It was at risk of being converted to market rate. So the developer came in and purchased it as a common bond, and they are maintaining the affordability so we don't lose that in the housing stock. Next slide, please. So this is a brief summary of what changed. You can see that it's actually a very similar project. It's still the renovation and preservation of 71 affordable housing units. What really changed here was the mix of the affordable income bands. So what happened is some units that were in the 80% area median income band, they were pushed to be made more affordable. So there's actually more affordable at the 51% to 61% area median income. But as a result of that change, it decreased the amount of tax revenue that will be generated from that project. So you can see in red, there's a decrease in the projected net tax capacity increase, which we consider a significant change. So when we rescored this project against the projects in the initial funding round, the overall ranking dropped from 6 to 11. And this placed the project below the next highest Minneapolis project, which was Pomosita. And Pomosita did not score enough points to receive funding in that initial funding round. So while the rescoring of the Stonehouse project did not yield enough points to be recommended funding on its own, other factors led us to recommend approval of this particular project change. So the Pomosita project, it did not receive funding in that initial grant round. So the city of Minneapolis later reapplied and received full funding for that in fall of 2020. So given the benefit of that hindsight, we know that approving this project change for Stonehouse in no ways deprives the Pomosita project of funds or is harmful to the city of Minneapolis. And so it maintains the integrity of the scoring, which is really what the intent of the rescore was. In fact, we think it would be more unfair to deprive the city of the funds as a result of Pomosita receiving it in a previous or in a subsequent funding round. And also the fact that it's a naturally occurring affordable project. We want to maintain an affordability, so it's something we do want to support. So it's a little bit of a unique situation on the rescore, but we feel comfortable recommending approval of this project change. So next slide, please. So then we're on to the proposed action. We propose that the Community Development Committee approve the project change as detailed in this report for the Stonehouse Square Grant, SG 12848, awarded to the City of Minneapolis, to authorize the Community Development Director to execute the amendment reflecting the changes on behalf of the Council. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Wadrick. Questions on that report? Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, I'm really happy to see that with the renovations, there are more affordable units. I am curious, however, to know that the reduction in the I think it was greater than 60 AMI. Were those mostly 3-bedroom units that got reduced?
Mr. Wadrick.
Chair and Councilmember Chambliss. That's a good question. I don't have that right in front of me. I could either look that up in just a moment and get that for you, or I could follow up and answer that for you.
Okay, because it reminds me of a similar project in Brooklyn Center where this project was in development and they decided to scale the project down, and that project reduced the 3-bedroom units. So that's why I was curious.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
I'm wondering if perhaps Amy might have information on that.
Yeah, Ms. Geisler, is it? Amy? Is that a question that you can answer for us? And thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair Lilligren and council members. I think I have my video going. Yes, I do. Thanks. Sorry, I don't use WebEx very often, so getting used to the controls. And council member, your question was about 3-bedroom units, and I'm just looking at the details for this project, and there actually are not any 3-bedroom units in the project. It is a mix of, it has a few studios, but most of them are 1- and 2-bedroom units. And I can tell you that the 1- and 2-bedrooms are pretty well evenly distributed across 50, 60, and then 70% rent levels, if that answers your question. But if you'd like to know, like, specifically which units changed as part of this proposed shift, we can look that up and provide that to you as a follow-up.
If I may, Chair?
Please, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, so no, I don't think that's necessary. I just want to have some clarity in how we were able to get more affordability. How were we able to get more affordable units?
Yes, and Chair and council members, I think I can provide a little bit of insight on that. This has been a pretty difficult project for Common Bond to assemble financing for. It's, just from the beginning, as Josiah talked about, it was a building that was really at risk of conversion to market rate. And so Common Bond had to compete with other buyers that were, actively trying to acquire the project. So it had to be acquired very rapidly for kind of a significant acquisition price, given the demand for the building. But the specific reason that affordability has increased from what it was before to what you're seeing today is because that Common Bond really needed to increase the number of tax credit units in the building. They needed to have more tax credit eligible units to increase tax credit equity because they had a need to close the financing gap on the project. So that's really the reason that's driving the affordability change.
Perfect.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss, any other questions?
No, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Great. Thank you. Before I recognize Councilmember Johnson, I will note that Councilmember Atlas Ingerbritsen joined us during Mr. Wadrick's presentation. So, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually toggling back and forth and looking at the committee report. So I just have a quick question. So I know these are really difficult projects to do, and kudos to Common Bond for saving and retaining these NOAA housing apartments. It's great. I'm kind of curious, because they offered voluntary relocation for over income tenants in order to make the deal work, and they had enough, so that was good from a tax credit perspective. It just shows you the gyrations we have to go through to make these projects work, right? But I'm curious too, on the slide that spoke about the net tax capacity change from 19,425 to an increase from 19,425 to 1994. Can somebody just walk me through that again? Because I recognize we had the shift in the AMI units to lower income units. So I'm just trying to understand, and I know net tax capacity, I've lived with that word for a long time in my life, but I'm trying to understand what so I'm just used to value driving tax capacity. So I'm just curious why it shifted. And then my second part of that question is just really simple too. When there is a change like this, is it triggered by a percent of the net tax capacity, or what triggers it to come back to us? Because I would imagine going in, there's probably a lot of precise estimates on these things.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Roderick, do you have a response for Councilmember Johnson?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that question. So the first question was about the change, basically what drove the change in the net tax capacity. So my understanding of that is there's the different, how can I explain this? Different units are classified differently for their tax rate. And I think so what we consider affordable based on our criteria in that 60 to 80% range, it actually generates tax that's considered, I think it's considered market rate. So it just generates more tax revenue. And so when it's shifted away to the more affordable bands, it just means there's a lot less tax being collected.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. I just didn't understand that there was actually a variation within the AMI unit. So that's great. Thanks for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm.
And then just what triggers, like what kind of a percentage would trigger it coming to us? So this is a pretty substantial one. Is that right?
This is a pretty substantial one. Yep. Anything below, we're looking for a reduction of 20%. That would trigger a significant change. And so anything greater than 20%, we would bring it to you for further approval.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really appreciate that, Josiah. And I just really am thrilled that Common Bond was able to come in, and it's a lot of hard work, and that ultimately we didn't displace another project too because of the scoring issue, but I appreciate you highlighting that. That's important to know, right? So I just appreciate the answers to those questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council Member. Further questions on this report? Any further questions? Hearing none, Mr. Wadrick has proposed that we approve the project change as detailed in the report and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the amendment. Is there a motion, please?
Motion by
Move
Chambliss.
Ingebrigtsen.
Thanks. I'll take that as a second, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, and moved by Chambliss. And welcome, Councilmember. Discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Nope. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted. And thanks, Ms. Geisler, for being here and for answering our questions. And we'll move on to our next and final business item, which is also a project change for a cleanup grant. And it's item 2021-83 for the Malcolm Yards Housing Contamination Cleanup Grant. And Mr. Wadrick will present again.
That's right. Thank you very much. And you can move to the next slide, please. So, quick overview of this grant. It was given in the spring of 2020, just under $200,000 for waste characterization of foundry sands, contaminated soil remediation, and soil vapor mitigation. The initial project that was funded with the grant was 143 market rate apartments with 30,000 square feet of commercial space. Move to the next slide, please. Now this summarizes the changes to the project. So the city submitted a request for a project change in November of 2020, and they informed us that the commercial space would be reduced. And so you see that there's a reduction from 30,000 square feet of commercial to just under 8,000 square feet of commercial. And our understanding is that what was driving that change was really driven by the pandemic and investors' reluctance to finance new commercial space in this economic climate. But part of the impact of that reduction in commercial space means there's less jobs that is going to be expected to be produced from this project. So that's a significant change. It was 111 expected jobs, and now there's 28 FTEs. But with the reduction in commercial, there was an increase in the number of market rate apartments. What was initially 143 apartments is now 184 apartments. And when you calculate both of those changes together, there is a slight reduction in the projected net tax capacity increase, but we wouldn't consider that a significant change. So it's really the jobs that is the driver here. When we rescored this project based on these changes, the original was 85 and the revised score was 77. So while that is a bit of a reduction, it was still greater than the lowest ranking project, which received a score of 70. So it would have been recommended for funding in the initial grant round. So we feel comfortable recommending approval of this project change. Next slide, please. So the proposed action is that the Community Development Committee approve the project change as detailed on this report for the Malcolm Yards Housing Grant, SG 13993, awarded to the City of Minneapolis, and to authorize the Community Development Director to execute the amendment reflecting the changes on behalf of the Council. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wadrick. Questions on that report? Any questions? Hearing none, Mr. Wadrick has proposed that we approve the project change as detailed for Malcolm Yards and authorize the Community Development Director to execute the amendment, reflecting the changes on our behalf. Is there a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Bento. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That was good. Thank you, Mr. Wadrick, for your work and for your presentations. And we'll move on to our final item on the agenda. It's an information item on tax-based sharing, metropolitan area for taxes payable in 2021. And Deborah Dietrich is here to present. Welcome, Ms. Dietrich.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm Deb Dietrich. I'm a planning analyst and local planning assistant in the Community Development Division. Next slide, please. Our metro area is known for a tax-based sharing program called Fiscal Disparities. Through this program, local taxing jurisdictions in the 7-county metro area share part of growth in commercial industrial net tax capacity, or tax base. The Minnesota legislature created the program by enacting it in 1971. The program was later renamed the Charles R. Weaver Metropolitan Revenue Distribution Act. The program began operating in 1975 after court challenges. The Fiscal Disparities Program continues to attract national and even international interest. A Cleveland, Ohio reporter wrote a series of articles about fiscal disparities in the fall of 2019. I've also received requests for information from the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy and the Government Finance Officers Association. There is no other program quite like it because of the large amount of tax base shared and the geographic area it covers. I'll start with some background information before talking about updated information for taxes payable in 2021. Next slide, please. The legislature created the program to achieve 6 goals: to make orderly development more likely by reducing the impact of fiscal considerations on location decisions, known commonly as fiscal zoning, and the impact of highways, transit facilities, and airports, to share resources produced by growth, to establish incentives to work for growth of the whole area, to encourage environmental protection of wetlands and preservation of land for parks and open space, to help communities in different stages of development by making resources more available to communities at early stages of development and redevelopment, and to work within the existing system of local governments and decision making. Goals of the program are often boiled down to promoting more orderly development and improving equity in the distribution of fiscal resources. These goals help explain why the Council has supported the Fiscal Disparities Program from the start. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Through tax base sharing, local taxing jurisdictions contribute 40% of growth in commercial industrial tax base to a shared pool that's redistributed. Commercial industrial tax base includes commercial, industrial, and public utility tax base. The program is built into our property tax system, with much of the work done by county property tax administrators. I'll cover the basics on how it works. On the contribution side, 40% of growth in commercial, industrial, and public utility tax base since 1971 goes into a shared pool of tax base. That's 40% of growth since the program was enacted. On the distribution side, the shared pool of tax base, or area-wide tax base, is redistributed using a formula based on population and relative property tax wealth, how a community compares to the average for the metro area. Because of the distribution formula, a community with relatively low property tax wealth receives a somewhat larger share of area-wide tax base. A community with relatively high property tax wealth receives a somewhat smaller share. Next slide, please. A total of 179 communities participate in the program. New Prague and Northfield are excluded by statute, and so are the MSP and St. Paul airports. Since 1991, the Council and the Minnesota Department of Revenue have a statutory role in determining eligibility of communities to participate. The Council takes the lead in this annual determination. According to state statute, a community must be excluded if its comprehensive zoning and planning policies conscientiously exclude most commercial industrial development for reasons other than preserving an agricultural use. This was enacted so a community couldn't benefit from tax base sharing if it deliberately excluded most commercial industrial development. Sunfish Lake, Birchwood Village, St. Mary's Point, and Woodland are not eligible to participate. Next slide, please. The most recent fiscal disparities information is for taxes payable in 2021. The program shared $500 million in tax base and over $697 million in tax revenue. Next slide, please. The shared pool of tax base has grown since 1975 with some interruptions. The top line in the chart, the red line, is the shared pool of tax base as a percent of total commercial, industrial, and public utility tax base in the metro area. For taxes payable in 2021, the shared pool was about 33% of total commercial industrial tax base. The bottom line is the shared pool as a percent of total tax base. For taxes payable in 2021, the shared pool was 10% of total tax base. Focusing on the top line, the percentage shared has been stable the last number of years, but going back to the 1990s, the upward trend was affected by some major declines in commercial industrial values in the 1990s because of a real estate slump. There were also some big tax abatements for substantial properties around 1995. And then there were reductions in tax rates for commercial industrial property by the legislature from 1997 through 2001. The legislature also made significant changes to the fiscal system as part of those 2001 tax reforms. Next slide, please. Because the fiscal disparities program redistributes tax base, communities are either net recipients or net contributors of tax base. For net recipients or net gainers of tax base, the distribution from the shared pool was greater than the contribution to the shared pool. For taxes payable in 2021, there were 110 net recipients, including 89 cities and 21 townships. For net contributors, the contribution to the shared pool was greater than the distribution from the shared pool. There were 69 net contributors, including 48 cities and 21 townships. The program has always had more net recipients than net contributors. Next slide, please. The top 20 net recipients and top 20 net contributors are listed on the left side of your screen. In the map, net recipients are shown in the pinkish shade. The top 5 net recipients include St. Paul, Brooklyn Center, Coon Rapids, Brooklyn Park, and Columbia Heights. St. Paul has long been the top net recipient. Top net contributors shown in blue concentrate in the Southwest area. The map really calls attention to the connection to major job centers and public infrastructure, such as the I-494, I-694 ring, and the airport. The top 20 net contributors made up nearly 60% of the total metro area's commercial industrial tax base. The top 5 net contributors were Minneapolis, Bloomington, Edina, Plymouth, and Eden Prairie. Minneapolis has been the top net contributor For taxes payable in 2018 through 2021, historically, Bloomington was the top net contributor or among the top contributors. That began to change after the legislature excluded two tax increment financing districts from contributing to the shared pool of tax base through 2034. Minneapolis has switched back and forth as a net contributor and a net recipient. It was a net recipient during most of the 2000s. Since taxes payable in 2014, it's been a net contributor. One thing to keep in mind is that this is only looking at communities, not at other taxing jurisdictions. Gain or loss of tax base in a community can be countered or offset by the opposite impact on a county. For example, Fridley is a top net contributor, but Anoka County is a net recipient. Next slide, please. Tax-based sharing reduces large disparities in property tax wealth and improves equity in fiscal resources. That in turn affects the ability to raise revenue. The difference in tax wealth, property tax wealth, is measured by the ratio of the highest to lowest commercial industrial tax base per person for communities with a population over 10,000. Those communities make up 90% of the area's population and 93% of its commercial industrial tax base. Without fiscal disparities, the ratio of the highest to lowest is 14 to 1. With fiscal disparities, the difference shrinks to 6 to 1. Next slide, please. For an individual parcel of commercial industrial property, up to 40% of its tax base is taxed at the area-wide tax rate. The rest is taxed at the local rate. Part of the commercial and industrial property will be taxed at the same area-wide rate, no matter where it's located in the metro area. This reduces differences in tax burdens and lessens competition for commercial industrial development. Next slide, please. I've been talking about tax base, but questions tend to come up about tax burdens or tax rates. House research for the Minnesota House of Representatives recently updated a report including analysis of changes in tax burdens and tax rates for taxes payable in 2018. It did this by showing the impacts if the fiscal disparities program was eliminated. Results show changes as if fiscal disparities wasn't in the picture. Without fiscal disparities, for the 6 net recipients with the biggest tax impacts and a population over 10,000, the average tax rate would increase between 11 and 22% for residential homestead property, and the tax rate would decrease between 0.3% and 15.3% for commercial industrial property. One example is that Columbia Heights would see the biggest increase in its tax rate. Again, these numbers really show the range of the biggest increases in tax rates without fiscal disparities. Now, without fiscal disparities when it comes to net contributors, for the 6 net contributors with the biggest tax impact, and again, a population of 10,000 or more, the average tax rate would decrease between 2.3 and 4.4% for residential homestead property. The tax rate would decrease from 5.6 to 11% for commercial industrial property. Among those communities, Rogers would see the biggest drop for residential homestead property, and Eden Prairie would see the biggest drop for commercial industrial property. Next slide, please. Updated information about the program is available on the Council's website. The website includes links to new resources. Two of those include a report by House Research that I mentioned in the previous slide, and an in-depth publication on the 50-year history of the program by Paul Gilgee, former research director at the Citizens League. It's a really extensive description of the 50-year history of the program, and staff are exploring ideas for calling attention to the upcoming 50th anniversary of the program in July. We may invite Mr. Gilgee and a panel of others to present to the council, and we welcome your ideas about that if you'd like to share them. Also, let me know if you have any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Dietrich, for that report. Questions on the report? Questions? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a great report. It's a very complex program, obviously, and really interesting. I'm curious, do you have any sense of why other areas of the country have not tried to implement something given the success in reaching the goals that we have and all of the interest that has been focused on it over the 50 years?
Mr. Chair and Council Member Cummings, yes, that's something that tends to come up when I talk to people who are interested in the fiscal disparities program and want to learn more. It's often asked, why aren't there more examples of a program like it? And I think that gets to just how innovative and unique our program is. And 50 years ago, that was a time of bipartisanship. There was just tremendous appetite for looking at major changes. So there are a lot of difficulties involved in doing something that redistributes this amount of tax base. There are some examples. Mr. Gilgee's report does summarize a number of other programs, but I would say the Meadowlands in New Jersey is probably the most similar. That's been around for about the same amount of time, but it only includes a little over a dozen communities, and it doesn't share the kind of tax base that we do here. We are certainly looked to as a terrific example, but again, that's acknowledging the challenges involved in making that kind of change.
Right. May I ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair? Are there still challenges locally to the program, or has that dust fairly well settled, or where are we with that?
Mr. Chair and Council Member, the program still, you could say it remains controversial for some. Because of that redistribution, there will always be communities who would rather keep that tax base within their community. But as I noted before, there are more communities who benefit from tax-based sharing. And it makes me think of former council member Elkins, Representative Elkins from Bloomington, would readily say he supports the program, even though at that time when he was on the council, Bloomington was the top net recipient.
Right.
So there are different ways to look at it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on Councilmember Cummings' first question. Part of the reason that it's much more difficult to do something like that now is because of the computer revolution and spreadsheets and the down and to the right syndrome, where you get a data run of what things will affect your jurisdiction and you go down and to the right and see what it's going to cost you or not cost you. This was put in place before that was readily available, so people looked at it in a more abstract manner than they look at things today.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further questions or discussion? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I really appreciate this report. And, you know, in the 50 years of the program, it's been studied and studied and studied, right? Because the Municipal Legislative Commission, as an example, who typically has the net givers, will, you know, work to see, can this program be changed? Can it end? Because, you know, their communities would love to keep more of that commercial industrial tax base and lower property taxes across the board in those communities. But every time a report comes out, it really kind of still demonstrates that it's still pretty much core to what it was really intended to be doing. And it's fairly consistent. So as you mentioned, Deb, cities coming on and off, which side of the line they're on, you know, just shows that when a city is building commercial industrial, it might flip to be, you know, a giver. And, you know, when a city can't do that, they're fully developed and largely residential, you know, they'll probably stay a recipient. The one thing that, as a local city person representing a Plymouth, which is a net contributor, you know, and an affordable housing advocate, I'd always wished that there was some way that communities that really struggle in the suburbs with expensive land values and trying to build affordable housing, if there could be a way to loop in to this program somehow for just some bit of an offset, you know, so that if you could retain some of that tax base, but it had to go to affordable housing or something to that effect. Because, you know, we've got the jobs growing in the suburbs, which is boosting the tax base, but then the workforce housing isn't following in the level that it needs to, and y'all know that. So it won't change, but that was one of the things that I thought, you know, how can we, you know, share this a bit so it's not just economic development and equalization, but, you know, trying to get back to, you know, the workforce and the people. So anyways, I really appreciate the presentation. You know, most of my cities aren't too thrilled about it, but they understand it. And it's the same across the state to a degree, but differently so with local government aid. So we're one Minnesota, we're one region. So thanks, Deb.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just building off of that, coming from a city that was a net recipient, that was a lifeblood for our budget. We'd get something like $150,000. That and LGA really were a major part of our small city's budget. And I never heard too much complaining from surrounding communities that were net contributors, because I think, including Roseville, which is a big net contributor, because I think they recognized for the most part that it was to their advantage to have a city next door to them that was stable. And so I thought it was interesting, Deb, that map that you showed of the contributors and the recipients is unlike any map that I typically see, where you have like the two big cities are typically in the same color for whatever map it is. Maybe the first ring suburbs are in that same color, and then it's a different color of whatever it might be. But here it's kind of scattershot for the most part, like you said, kind of centered around the airport and the major freeways and things like that. So I'd love to have Mr. Gilgee and maybe members of the Citizens League be part of a panel. I read like the first paragraph of that report, the book. I think it's a book that he wrote, and he talks about how another member of the Citizens League task force that was looking into this just leaned over to him and started talking about this idea he had about sharing tax revenue. And 3 legislative sessions later and 2 court cases or 3 court cases later and 50 years later, here we are. It's a pretty amazing story. And actually, he talked about this guy that mentioned it to him, or whose idea it was, and I Googled him right before this meeting. He passed away just a few years ago at the age of 93. And even in his obituary, he talked about all these amazing things that he did, but it didn't mention fiscal disparities was his idea. And I'm like, bang, that is a major idea that is worth talking about. So yeah, I'd love to see some sort of panel. I think that'd be really interesting.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please, Ms. Dietrich. And then Councilmember Chambliss. Yep,
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, I would just like to emphasize what you said, that it really is a remarkable program. With 50-year history, it still exists. There have been a few changes, but it still is largely about fulfilling those same programs or same program goals the legislature had. So I think there are plenty of arguments to say that it exists because it works mostly as intended. And I think that's something to celebrate.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the presentation and the discussion and the information. This is a great policy initiative to show how you can execute an equity plan and have it work and have people work together for it. So for it to be a 50-year plan says a lot about how strategic the plan was, and like Councilmember Lindstrom said, looking at the map and not seeing what you typically see. This is really great, and to Councilmember Johnson's good points, if we could find out how to do this in other ways, that would be great.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? Questions? Hearing none, thanks, Ms. Dietrich, for the presentation and for your work. And yeah, I wouldn't have realized it was this important anniversary of the Fiscal Disparities Program, so I'm glad you're thinking of how to recognize that and to celebrate really an incredible success. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
I'm
sorry. I had one more little question.
No,
so,
go for it.
So as I'm looking, because I think I just assumed there were more cities in the program than not. So how does this, so I know the cities that were excluded because they're residential cities, they're not doing CI, so they don't get to participate. But at what point does a city tip and then enter the system? And like, who was the last, what was the last city that came in and joined the program or was determined to join the program?
Mr. Chair and Council Member, it's really been a matter of starting with most of the communities participating, with just the 2 exceptions that were excluded by statute. And then because of concern over some communities that had almost no commercial industrial development who benefited in a noticeable way. The legislature then did make that change to have the council and the Department of Revenue examine eligibility each year. So only 4 have been excluded since 1992. It was that Sunfish Lake was excluded for taxes payable that year, but no other city has or community has been really asked to drop out of the program, or if that's not the proper term, but to be ineligible to participate. It's been over 15 years. So it doesn't happen often.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson? Thank you. Any further discussion, further questions? As this was an information item, there's no action required, and it was the final item on our agenda. Director Barajas, anything before we adjourn?
No, it's just great to see all your faces, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, and it's good to see your little one there in your
Yep.
space. Michelle, anything for us?
Not that I can think of. Thank you, Chair Lilligren and everyone.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further business before the Councilmember Wolf, were you just waving goodbye, or did you want to? Okay, all right. Seeing no further business before us, we're adjourned. Enjoy the
Bye,
day,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good week.